Okay, I'm gonna dive right in.
January 5th.
So we have today. So last week we sort of discussed it a little bit. Is that we've been sort of going through Ketuvim. We've been going through writing. So we did Psalms and Proverbs and Job, and now we're up to Song of Songs, which we usually read during Passover. So for our holiday cycle. But now we're reading a little early as part of our Bible study cycle. I think that'd be a really nice thing to be able to do. You can't have enough Song of Songs. It's a fun book to read. It's a confusing book to read in a lot of different ways, which we'll dive into in a moment.
All women.
But it's always, again, interesting to read some of these books that are perhaps less read, especially from beginning to end. I think to our detriment, some of these books are less read from beginning to end. And so Song of Songs is short enough, we can really sort of dive into it in a couple of weeks and really finish it. Song of Songs, first, let's see who remembers from last April, I think, when we talked about this last time. What is Song of Songs? What is it? What's it about? What's the what, so to speak? Good. It's new to everybody. It makes me feel better. So, Song of Songs is part of the scrolls, right? It's part of the different scrolls that we have in the Hebrew Bible, and it's a collection of love poetry, of love songs, or one might say erotic poetry. And the reason why you can make that differentiation is that when we're reading the text, one of the questions that comes up is, are we talking about love or lust in the poem, right? Because the word love is mentioned, let's call it sparingly in the text. It doesn't seem to be a lot about love in here as much as it is about physical attraction, about that kind of intimacy that we're talking about. And one can ask, well, why is this book in the Bible? Well, we'll get there in a minute. Originally, when this book was written, it might have been read basically for entertainment purposes. You see sort of artists sometimes who go up and they compose a poem or a rap or some kind of song, and they get up and sing it, for amusement. If you go to sometimes different restaurants, so people who sing songs, as part of the meal experience, it could have something like that. That it was just used for entertainment purposes. And the reason why we think that might be the case is there's actually a part of the Talmud that decries that very act, of using it for that reason as a way of entertaining or amusing, your friends and neighbors. Because if it wasn't happening, they wouldn't have written down a rule prohibiting it from happening. So I think that's how I would look at it. If they're forbidding it, it means someone must be doing it, or else why bother forbidding it? You wouldn't have to. It could have been used as a text for wedding services. We actually use it today for wedding services, some of the different selections. So if you've heard the line, Ani lidodi vidodi li, I am my beloved is mine, that's from Song of Songs. And there are other sort of very famous lines from wedding services that come from Song of Songs. As I mentioned, it's recited during Passover. There's a lot of nature imagery in the book, a lot about sort of springtime and gardens and blooming, some double entendre perhaps, but there's a lot of sort of that imagery in the book. And so I think that's one of the reasons it's read during Passover, because it's a springtime festival. There's also a connection, sometimes a little bit strained, but a connection between this book and the Exodus from Egypt. The idea that this is a book not about two people in love or these two people who are attracted to each other. It's about God and Israel. It's about our relationship with the divine. Sure, if that works for including the book, I'll take it. It's a great book anyway, and if it's about God and Israel, gets a little raunchy, but that's okay. But that's part of the reason why it was included. It was seen as a metaphor for God's relationship with Israel. If you were in an Orthodox synagogue, you'll find it more in their Sidurim, in their prayer books. They'll actually have the Song of Songs in the prayer book as part of the Friday night liturgy. And so if we think about Lecha Dodi, come my beloved, let us greet the bride, sort of in that kind of vein, right? That if we're going to believe that Song of Songs is about God's relationship with Israel, it makes sense, to maybe include Song of Songs in it. So it can work in that way. Another sort of cheekier interpretation of that idea is that the nature of Song of Songs, its tone and its images, its metaphors. It's good to read that on Shabbat. That way, when you come home after Shabbat services, maybe you will be more inclined to be with your partner on Shabbat, to perform your Shabbat duty, as we say. So I think that could be a reason possibly as well. Other than that, I don't want to delve too much in the introduction part of this because I really want to get into the book. But there is, again, a lot of perceived allegory that I think helps in terms of just rationalizing why we have the book. But on the flip side of it, I think a book that expresses sort of these kinds of feelings, these kinds of desires, it's very relatable, I think, in its way, and it's very human, and it talks about, I think, some of its themes of love and devotion, and of course, there's a lot about Israel in the book itself, things of the land of. I think those reasons in and of themselves might be okay for the inclusion of this text. There's, again, I think for me it's a positive. I think I would hope everyone would agree that it's also nice to have a book that really seems to have a very positive view of sex and intimacy. I think sometimes we think of the biblical text, we think of sort of other Jewish texts, wouldn't always get that feeling. But I think here that it has that sense of just positiveness about that kind of relationship, that physicality. And it's talking about procreation. It's talking about be fruitful and multiply. These are just two young people who are into each other, who are digging each other, and good. The fact that the Bible gives that a thumbs up makes me very happy. I think that's a very nice thing. It is probably from all the books in the Bible, save maybe a few, top 5, let's call it, to hedge our bets. But it is probably one of the most egalitarian books in the entire Bible, which I also like. They possess each other equally, right? I am my beloved is mine. A lot of these, passages talk about how they possess each other, they connect to each other, and I think that's really nice. The book cycles between the joys of being together and the pain, the yearning of being apart. And there's a lot of food in here too. A lot of food, a little pomegranate, little figs, little milk, little honey, just to give us, again, that Israel-centric geography, that we're talking about the land of Israel, different places are named. So it really does put us in a context in the land of Israel. This book was supposed to have been written by Solomon. That's what the tradition, sort of brings us, is that this is one of Solomon's big 3. He writes, Song of Songs in his youth, Proverbs in middle age, and Ecclesiastes when he's old and cynical. So he reads. So they say, well, it makes sense. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So, maybe he was no stranger to a love song or two. He had enough women in his life, that he had to entertain. So, who else would know more about love than Solomon? And then there is some reference to Solomon throughout the book. But that being said, it probably dates later. The scholarship, the critical scholarship of this book would yield a much later date than Solomon, who lived 10th century BCE. This book was most likely 3rd, 4th century BCE. There's some Persian in there, which wouldn't make any sense for Solomon's time. And this other sort of language, other sorts of imagery come from sort of that Greek-Persian period. Other than that, sort of like Job, is a lot of poetry. And so sometimes that makes the translation a little bit tough. And there's a lot of changing in voice. So we can't always tell who's speaking. Sometimes it feels like the female partner is speaking. Sometimes it's the man. Sometimes it feels like a Greek chorus is speaking. So that part can make it a little tricky in terms of the understanding. But the female voice is actually more dominant in the poem, which again makes it sort of unique. Her experiences, her feelings, her perceptions are more central to the book itself. Could a woman have written Song of Songs or part of it? Who knows? Maybe. A lot of wordplay, a lot of puns, a lot of repetition, simile, metaphor, and of course, my favorite, the double entendre, are all used frequently in Song of Songs. So, with that said, let's dive into the text and let's read some of this good stuff. We need a bottle of wine for this class sometimes. Okay. This is one of those days. Okay, here we go. Song of Songs. Debbie Siegel. Debbie, you want to unmute and read a little bit?
You know, Rabbi, I don't see too many men here tonight in this class
I think that's pretty usual, to be honest.
for this subject.
Yes.
Okay, chapter 1, the Song of Songs by Solomon. 2, sentence 2, kiss me with the kisses of your mouth, for your caresses are better than wine. Your perfume is delightful to smell. Your name is like fragrant oil. That is why young girls love you. Pull me after you. Let's run. The king has brought me into his room. Let's rejoice and be glad with you. Let's remind ourselves that your caresses are better than wine. Rightly, they have loved you.
Indeed. Sounds like God in Israel, right? No, not so much. We're not getting that vibe. So in the beginning here, it doesn't waste time, right? It sort of dives right into it, where where we get the sense that they want to be with each other. Again, it's this longing, physical longing for each other. There's a lot in this book that's very sensory, right? About touch, about smell, about taste, about sight. So there's a lot of visual, a lot of different physicality markers here in the text. And I think that's interesting only to the extent that, when you're in love with somebody, when you're with somebody that you want to be with, that's part of the experience, right? You have sort of a sense of the whole person. And there's just a lot of different sensations that go along in intimacy, and we enjoy in different ways, different levels. So, the kisses that are sweeter than wine, the caresses that are sweeter than wine, perfume delightful to smell. And the fact that this, again, so this is the female voice, this is why young girls love you, talking about, her gentleman. And let's get away. Let's run. Let's run into the woods. Let's run into the wilderness. Let's it has almost a, I would say a star-crossed lover vibe, but, they want to be with each other and they want to get away, right? They want to run. They want to escape from the public eye and get somewhere private, right? And let's be together. Let's rejoice and be glad. Easy enough. Renee, you want to pick up there? Sorry, I went down too far.
Okay. I am dark but beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Don't look down at me because I have become dark. It is the sun that has scorched me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me guard the vineyards, but my own vineyard I could not guard.
Indeed. So
a little sexual.
Just a little bit, Renee.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we got today. That's our book. So the idea of her being dark but beautiful, that actually in itself is interesting because it's unclear what that means. We know from rabbinic Judaism and just frankly culture, that dark skin was not always considered to be beautiful. Sometimes it was considered to be negative, to be very dark skinned. We have a vision here, and anyone who's been to Israel, anyone who's been to the Middle East, there's a swarthier complexion, than maybe the very pale sort of like European, sort of Icelandic, Nordic. That isn't the look, right? And so a little bit darker. In
Dark
Israel.
skin is in a lot of cultures considered low class.
Yes.
Because that means you work.
Yeah, exactly right. And so the idea is here that she works out, in the sun, right? She's out in the fields, right? You got it exactly right, Gary. So that's the idea, is that she's out in the fields, and that's why she's dark skinned, right? Because she's being crisped by the sun, right? That she's been baking out there because she's guarding the vineyards. She's out there, farming, but perhaps her own vineyard, however we're going to read that, she could not guard, right? Okay, so that's where it's going to have the metaphor there, maybe a little allegory.
Rabbi, did you see Linda? Linda sent you a message?
Yeah, I see, that. I can't control your screen, so I'm not sure what I can do about that one in particular. So right now you should be seeing verse 5. I am dark, but I am beautiful, but beautiful.
No, I could try and go out and come back in.
Yeah.
This happened to me on Friday night too.
Yeah, so there might be a bandwidth issue. Are you hearing us okay?
Yeah, I'm hearing you fine.
Okay, so that part's good.
Yeah, I could go on my tablet. Maybe that would be better.
I'm not sure, but so I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And is it moving for you at all or no?
No.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm not sure what that's about. That's a tech support issue that I don't have. I wish I did.
I'll go on my tablet.
Okay, sorry about that, Linda. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Okay, so so going back to verse 5, here with the dark and beautiful, obviously there are some again overtones, perhaps racial, perhaps class, as Gary mentioned, about sort of the working class just of being outside and schwitzing and baking in the sun. And I think that's a very interesting passage, especially again, as that has been translated throughout throughout Jewish history and its continued relevance today. In the Jewish world right now, there's a lot of conversation about Jews of color, and that we have Jews from all over the world. But there's often a very Ashkenazic, centric view of what Jewish life is. And that we don't always understand that there are Jews of many different races, many different skin colors, so to speak, many different cultures that are Jewish, and the question of inclusion sort of comes in. I don't know if any of you've heard of Mara Gad. Mara Gad is a Jewish woman. She's African-American. And she has written on this subject extensively and has a book whose name I'm forgetting the title of. But, she, amongst others, have sort of written on this subject, how in the Jewish community, it's not always easy to be accepted if you're a person of color and Jewish at the same time. And you get sometimes a lot of questions about, well, where are you really from? Or, are you really Jewish? Or a lot of this and a lot of that, even in communities that consider themselves to be, more inclusive and more welcoming. And so it's just it's interesting to see that, not interesting, but I think it's a challenge, I think, again, as we move forward, but how we use language and how we understand about the totality of the Jewish experience is not only confined to Eastern Europe. So just an interesting thing that I think about when I read this passage. The tents of Kedar, some biblical references, curtains of Solomon, again, gives us back to that Solomon authorship idea. We can keep going a little further. Actually, Gary, you want to pick up here? Tell me, my soul's dear love.
Okay. Tell me, my soul's dear love, where are you grazing your sheep? Where are you resting them at noon? Why should I be as one who is lost near the flocks of your friends, O most beautiful of women? If you do not know, follow the tracks of the flock and graze your kids near the tents of the shepherds.
Yeah, so got to meet up somewhere, right? For a little romantic getaway.
Yeah,
Where
I'm
are
behind
you?
the rock.
Yeah, gotta find some place, right? Where are you grazing those sheep? Let me know. I can meet up with you for lunch. Where are you resting them at noon? Why am I wandering around trying to find you? Why am I lost? And, I don't have your cell number. I gotta find where you are, where you're hanging out. And then so that's her on 7, and then he comes in on 8, right? So it changes who's speaking. And 8, either he's talking on 8, or it's the chorus. We're not sure who's speaking on 8, but they're talking to her now. Oh, beautiful, most beautiful of women. If you don't know, like, there are his tracks over there. You can follow him. You can sort of, he's left his mark. He's left a trail with the sheep, and so go follow and you'll find him. It's a lot of seeking and finding. Taking this a step back and getting back into the allegory part of this, the metaphor of seeking and finding, one can see how that can be related to God, right? Is that we as Jews, we seek, right? We pray, we reach out to God, and maybe God's not always easy to find, right? Maybe we don't always know where God is. Maybe we sometimes feel a little distant, a little apart from God. And so we sort of call out, where are you? Where can I find you? And then, you can find God. Maybe if you look close enough, you look hard enough, you can find traces of God, in the world. You can find little footsteps, little footprints, of God all around, if we look hard enough. Now we're going to get to some, I love these metaphors because they don't really sound very complimentary to a 21st century audience. But that being said, Sharon, you want to pick up here?
Okay. Oh, my darling, you are like a mare in Pharaoh's chariots. Ornamented rows make your cheeks look pretty, as does a necklace on your throat. We will make for you ornamented rows of gold with inlaid points of silver. While the ruler is at the banquet table, my nard provides a fragrance. My beloved is my bag of myrrh resting between my breasts. My beloved is my cluster of henna blooms from the vineyards of En-Gedi.
Indeed. Thank you for that. Yeah, a little salacious tonight. Okay. So comparing a woman to a horse is not always complimentary, I would think. That's just my male opinion. I could be wrong. But that being said, there's something to it, I'm sure, about stately and, regal and majestic and et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure there are other things one can think of as well. The adornments, right? The adornments, the different jewelry, he notes as well. And we should make more adornments, more jewelry, because that's we're beautifying at this point, right? And so and this line, I can't even tell you what this means. I have no idea, other than just mentioning the idea of, again, that's the sights and tastes and smells, are part of this. So the idea of, while the ruler is at the banquet table, my nard provides a fragrance. My beloved is a bag of myrrh, right? And so this idea that it's pleasing, or it's pleasing smells. One might say pheromones, but I think one can guess here it is more about the different perfumes, different spices that would resonate, at that time. If you think about how much money these different stores make selling beautiful smelling soaps and bath oils and candles and whatever it is, because we know there are some scents that are pleasing, and each of us has maybe a different idea of what smell, causes what kind of response. But we can just think about Bed Bath and Beyond, or Bath and Body Works, these different places that sell all this chazarai, with the idea being, it's like vanilla or coconut or whatever it is, lavender. So think about that, I guess, when you're reading this kind of passage, that you know, these bags of myrrh and henna blooms, you know, these just are meant to call to mind like really good smells, really sweet smells, you know, that are pleasurable. You know, that's how I would sort of read it. A cluster of henna blooms. From the vineyards of, by the way, Ein Gedi. Who's been to Ein Gedi? Renee, I see. Anyone else? I can't see. So, it's
Sandy.
Sandy's been.
Marilyn, you weren't at Mangeti? You were at Mangeti.
Yeah.
Okay, I was there.
Right.
Yeah, Ein Gedi's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You stay at the kibbutz?
Mm. Mm-mm.
Sandy, where do we go?
I don't know. I don't remember where we stayed at several. One of the.
I went on a different trip than them, and we just went to. I think there was like where people swam in Engedi.
Oh yeah. Well, there's
The waterfall. Isn't there a waterfall?
There's waterfalls. There's spas. There's lots of good stuff to pamper oneself in Ein Gedi.
Right.
I stayed at the kibbutz. It's fantastic because the kibbutz has a botanical garden, and it's very famous in Israel because this is down south. This is in the Dead Sea area, and you know the Dead Sea soil. You know the nutrients that can grow almost anything. So they have all these plants from all around the world in their botanical garden that they can grow, and it's a pretty cool thing. It's how they make their money at the kibbutz is the botanical gardens. They have a nice mess hall, I remember, for lunch. You know, that was nice. And I just remember, like, we got out of our, you know, cabin, I guess, you know, one would call it. And Elizabeth and I sort of walked out and we're looking at the view and the scenery. And you sort of see, like, you know, these ibex running across. You're like, hey, it's not bad at all. Not a bad view. Sort of the mountains and the, and then you go to the Dead Sea and get all, you know, sulfured up in the Dead Sea. But Ein Gedi, I did enjoy. Ein Gedi was beautiful. And so like that for me, again, if you're an Israeli who's reading this, you know, you're somebody who's familiar with the topography in the area of Israel, you see some of these things, go, oh, I've been to Ein Gedi. I can understand about vineyards and about blooming and all those really nice things that happen in Ein Gedi. A lot of Dead Sea products also at Ein Gedi, as one can imagine. Whenever you go to Israel and you go down south, they always try to have you buy all these Dead Sea products for X number of shekels. Then you realize you can just get home and buy them from Amazon for the same price. But that being said, there's something more authentic when you buy it, I guess, in Israel. Okay. A little bit more of the lovey-dovey stuff as we do. Marilyn Warner, Marilyn, you want to pick up a little bit?
Sure, but on that last one where it was comparing women to the mayors, I'd much rather that than be compared to a camel.
Fair enough. I think that's right. I think that's a good call.
Oh, you are beautiful, my darling. You are beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Eyes are
Really
like
appropriate.
those.
Thank you. Oh, you were reading. I'm sorry. Keep going.
I was really reading.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Oh, you are beautiful, my darling. You are beautiful. Your eyes are like those of doves. Oh, my beloved, you are handsome and beautiful, and our bed is shaded by leaves. The beams of our house are cedars. Our rafters are juniper.
It's really nice when you think about sort of, again, if one is more outdoorsy, I am not, but if one is more outdoorsy, generally speaking, again, you have a lot of these really nice images of being outside and being in nature, right? And so they're sort of romancing each other. Your eyes are like those of doves. I don't know what that means, but that being said, it's supposed to be complimentary. Are doves' eyes especially pretty?
Yes.
There you go. I'll take it. Doves' eyes are beautiful.
It sounds like they're describing a little hut rather than a real house. Something that like a little, just a little hut, kind of a quiet little place, not a real house.
I think that's exactly right. I think they're almost like, they're going to a secret getaway, right? They're going to a location that's not even meant necessarily to be like a domicile, like a home, but they're going out to their own private little makeout spot. They're going into their I'm trying to think of a better word than treehouse, but they're going into like something like that almost in a way, like their own private spot. And then instead of it being like cement and brick and whatever it is, they're surrounded by nature and the trees, and leaves. The beams of our house are cedars, our rafters are juniper. I think it actually means like the trees are right around us, right? The juniper flowers, all around us. I think that's exactly what they're going for. Okay, that is chapter 1. One down. Chapter 2, Sandy, give me a little chapter 2.
I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. Like a lily among thorns, so is my darling among the maidens. Like an apple tree among trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the youths. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my mouth.
Indeed. So, a rose of Sharon, so again, more Israel topography. A lily of the valleys. Rose and lily are used a lot in this text about these flowers, that are seen as very, very beautiful, very desirable. So I think here, this is how I'm reading it, though I could be wrong. It's hard to get a sense of it, I think. I think this first line is the female, I'm a rose of Sharon. And then I think the male voice jumps in on too, responding like a lily among thorns, so is my darling among the maidens, that you are one of a kind, right? You are so exceptional. You stand out from everybody else. And then she returns on line 3, like an apple tree among trees of the forest, right? So he is an apple tree. Okay. Again, it's an interesting compliment, but I think here it's more like an apple tree, having a lot of positive elements as opposed to maybe some other trees that are in the forest. You sit in the shade, and the fruit, of course, being sweet. I'm not going to extrapolate too much on that. I'll leave that to your own imaginations. But indeed, so you have that moment there as well. And so now that they are together, once again, right? Because again, it's a lot of being apart and coming together. Now they are together again. Actually, Sandy, you want to give me a little bit more?
Sure. He brought to me the banquet room, and his banner of love was over me. Sustain me with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left hand was under my head. His right arm embraced me.
It's a nice moment, I think. I think that's sort of sweet on verse 5 in particular, that they're so in love with each other. They're just so wholly consumed by their passion. They forgot to eat. She's hungry. She hasn't eaten anything because she's so in love, with him. So he needs to give her something to eat, some scones, some raisin cakes. Who doesn't like a good scone? And some apples from the apple tree. For I am faint with love. I'm choosing to read that literally. I'm sure one can read it a different way, but I'm choosing to read that they are famished almost in a way, because they have they're so in love with each other. If one wanted to push it a little bit further, perhaps they've loved each other a lot. And now it's time for a snack afterwards. They've worked up a little bit of hunger. They are faint with love. That could perhaps be it as well. But this idea that they need to have something to eat because love is overpowering them. And then we get to sort of this last line here about the left hand and the right hand sort of cuddling and embracing. Very sweet, very nice. I don't know if there's much more to it than that, but it's just, I think, again, that nice sense of physicality that we have here, that intimacy that's there. Now we get a little bit of a non sequitur on verse 7. Let's see. Oh, Melissa, how about you pick up on verse 7 there?
I adjure you, O maidens of Jerusalem, by gazelles or by hinds of the field, do not wake or rouse love until it please. Hark, my beloved, there he comes, leaping over mountains, bounding over hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or like a young stag. There he stands behind our wall, gazing through the window, peering through the lattice.
Okay, so this 7 is a little bit, I think, as I said, a little bit of more of a Greek chorus kind of line, where she's sort of talking to these maidens of Jerusalem. With this message here, we're going to see this again in, I think, chapter 3 or 4. I think it's almost word for word the exact same thing. Do not wake or rouse love until it please. So this idea that don't interrupt, in a way, like love's gonna come at its appointed time. Wait for it, and once it's there, don't mess with it. Something about, I think that's sort of the message here, that let love do its thing. Don't push it. Don't try to mess with it. Love is gonna happen when it's gonna happen, and when it does, huzzah! That's a good thing. That's my takeaway from verse 7. Then we get a little bit more, back into it. This is her voice coming again, right? There he comes, leaping over mountains, bounding over hills, able to outrun a speeding locomotive and leap tall buildings with a single bound. Oh wait, that's Superman. But I think that's the message here. That's the idea, that he's just amazing. He's a wonderful, strong, passionate dude who is just so fantastic. The agility, the strength of a gazelle and a stag. And so there he is, sort of gazing, looking at me adoringly, through the lattice. Through that lattice. Okay. Linda, are you able to see where we are? You want to unmute?
Okay, got it.
Yep.
My beloved spoke thus to me. Arise, my darling, my fair one, come away. For now the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. The blossoms have appeared in the land, the time of pruning has come. The song of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The green figs form on the fig tree, the vines and blossom give off fragrance. Arise, my darling, my fair one, come away.
Indeed. Okay, and so now he's sweet talking to her a little bit. Okay, so before, he's outside, he's the gazelle who's outside, but now he's here. Now he's with her, and say, hey, it's time. It's time to go. It's time for us to run away with each other. Maybe things were a little quiet before. Now we have again that metaphorical language, that dualism, right? Between talking about nature qua nature, right? Talking about the environment, the surroundings, and perhaps also being a metaphor for romance, right? And so maybe
it's springtime.
It's springtime. Springtime's a season of love, right?
Yeah.
It's springtime. Winter, is past. Things have thawed, and there's blooms shooting up everywhere, and there's just a lot of new life and new energy. And the blossoms have appeared, and the time for pruning has come, again, take that as you will. And the song of the turtle dove, a lot of love and in the air, right? The beautiful songs of the birds. There's a lot of lushness, a lot of greenness everywhere. The figs are delicious. The figs on the trees. The vines give off a fragrance. Again, we've got that taste sensation, we've got the visual, you got the smell, we got it all sort of here. Come away with me, come away. Very nice. I haven't had a fig in a long time, I gotta tell you. When's fig season?
Oh, early summer.
Early summer? Yeah, for figs, if that sounds right. Might be a while then to get the figs again.
Yeah. You don't think that this is referring to a time to get pregnant?
It could be that too. it could definitely be about fertility, as well. Certainly, I think that's in here.
That's part of spring.
Part of springtime,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So definitely, I think that could be part of it as well.
That's the mating season.
Mating season. So I think that's So like mating season, I think is definitely here.
The green figs on the on the fig tree.
Yeah. So there's new life springing up everywhere. I think that's really good. Okay, and actually, Lee, do you want to pick up here? Oh, my dove.
Did you say Leah?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, my dove, in the cranny of the rocks, hidden by the cliff, let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your face is comely. Catch us, the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, for our vineyard is in blossom. My beloved is mine, and I am his who browses among the lilies. When the day blows gently and the shadows flee, set out, my beloved, swift as a gazelle or a young stag. Hills of spices.
Oh, thank you for that one. The idea of the dove, right? So like the dove is almost hidden away, right? But now it's time for the dove to emerge from the hiding place and be with her beloved, right? And that's that's I think the imagery that you have here. Let's again run away together. They're talking to each other. This little fox's business, I think, is unclear to me exactly what that's talking about. But again, I think it's I got nothing on foxes. And if anyone has any idea on what these little foxes mean, that they have a better imagination than I do. But the vineyard is in blossom. I think maybe it's about let's not let anything stand in our way, perhaps. Let's not be bothered by the things that might interrupt us. Let's make sure that we can have some private time and nothing is coming to spoil it.
One of the about children, having children, little foxes who ruin our time together.
Oh my goodness, maybe catch us the little foxes, right? This verse 16 is one of the more famous lines from the book. My beloved is mine, I am his. This is not Ani Ledodi, that comes later. But this is another line that's often used in weddings as well. At least the first part. Who browses among the lilies. If we remember the first sentence of this chapter, she is a lily of Sharon. So again, there's some meaning there, I'm pretty sure.
The guy's looking around and she's the one that wants him. He's browsing among the lilies.
Yeah, he's browsing among the lilies.
But he's mine. That's what she's saying. He's looking around, but he's mine.
He's mine, exactly. Who browses among the lilies. Yeah, perhaps, exactly right. Set out, my beloved, swift as a gazelle or a young stag for the hill of spices. Once again, I'll leave that to your imagination as well. But if we read other parts of this book, I think we have a sense of what hills might refer to. But that being said,
I'm so amazed that this is actually part of the Bible when most of everything we've read so far is murder and killing and horrible things, and this is so beautiful.
That's a really good point, and I think that's one of the fun parts about Ketuvim is that we have some of these books that they read differently, than other parts of the Bible. As I've said more than once, I think in this class, that reading this in English, the authors, the translators do their best, right, to try to do this in such a way that it conveys the sort of the sense of the Hebrew. But these are there's a lot of artistry, to these Ketuvim books, and this is really beautiful poetry, in the Hebrew, and there's I think it's a testament, no pun intended, to the creativity sort of the different authors and their ability to create something like this that one could argue, one can make a case, I think, that these books of poems, that eventually became Song of Songs, eventually this was redacted and put into a book together. I think that people just found it so gosh darn lovely that it felt sacred to them. It felt holy, to them. And then one can argue that, well, actually, I don't think one can even argue it. I think it's just factual in a way that the rabbis then were almost stuck with this book. And they said, well, okay, this is actually about God and Israel. Don't get all hot and bothered. This is about God and Israel. Don't get your mind out of the gutter. God and Israel, God and Israel. When you sort of read this, less so. Probably about God and Israel. But it had permeated, I would think, the cultural zeitgeist, of the people, right? Like they understood what this was. They knew it. They heard it. They heard it when they went to a wedding. They heard it when they went to the local bar. They heard it when a bunch of their friends were together and were maybe being a little bit ribald with each other. Or maybe they heard it when they were with their lover, and then they were reading this together. This became so important and it couldn't be excluded in a way. And so you say, hey, you know what? Solomon wrote it. Excellent. If Solomon wrote it, it could be a biblical book. If it's about God and Israel, it could be a biblical book. If it has all these things about Israel and springtime and nature, it could be a biblical book. If it's all an allegory for the Exodus from Egypt, which we could literally go verse by verse in this thing and find ways the rabbis have interpreted this as relating to the Exodus from Egypt. That's
Rabbi,
yeah.
I have a question.
Please.
All of this that we're reading, what is it? We see beauty in this, and it's erotic, but not ever nasty in any way. What is the viewpoint from, say, Christians looking at this? Because I never hear them ever mention it, and it's almost like they avoid it.
My response there would be is that I think that we think the Christians read more of the Hebrew Bible than they do. My experience of my Christian colleagues has been that they have a pretty good grasp on the 5 books of Moses, and they have some sense of the prophetic literature. I don't think a lot of them actually touch this book with a 10-foot pole, but I would say they don't touch Esther with a 10-foot pole either.
Yeah.
Because it's just not relevant to them. It doesn't relate to sort of what they're doing. They don't need Lamentations, in the same way, or Ezra and Nehemiah. So I think that some of these books towards the back of our Bible, I don't think come into play for them so much. I also
a good question.
Yeah,
it was a good question.
Yeah,
but I think there was also I come from a Christian background.
Yeah,
and I think that they have kind of a rejection of this sexuality here. There's kind of a cultural thing. They don't see it as necessarily good, where I see Jews as accepting this as something of beauty, not nasty or vile.
I would make an argument, though I'm happy to be wrong, and I'm happy to have this point countered, but at least the way I have experienced it, and as I have studied it, Judaism, this book in particular, but certainly rabbinic literature, while not always being the most feminist, that we're not going down that road, but I think there is certainly a lot more sex positivity in early Jewish books than there are in Christian books. I would argue that there's a lot of of that in rabbinic literature. Again, that's a generalization. I want to be clear, but overall, there is in rabbinic literature a lot about sex and about intimacy and about love that is very positive, and there's some that's not so much. I mean, again, I want to be fair, but I think that because the rabbis, I think early on, realized that intimacy very clearly was not just for child making. I think was sort of very positive for that era, and also that the idea that there's a mutuality to intimacy that I think was sort of ahead of its time. Again, there are definite counterpoints to be made to some of that as well, but I'm saying generally speaking, I would say that Rabbinic Judaism was very early on more sex positive than other faith traditions. And as it has developed, I would argue that it still probably holds true that at least among the Western religions, that Judaism is probably one of the more sex positive faith traditions. You get to the Eastern religions, it's another story. Some of them can hold a different title to it. But I think, again, for the Western religion, I think we do okay in this conversation. I mean, there's just so much thoughtful conversation, agree or disagree with some of the conclusions they draw, but so much thoughtful conversations about sex, about the marital, obligations to each other, that's in there, and like the Talmud is known for, in pretty good detail about different things, which I think, again, it was ahead of its time. But I think it's definitely right. In this book, again, that's why there's a lot about they want each other, right? They're physically attracted, they're drawn to each other. There's no mention of marriage here, right? There's no, let's go to the chapel, that's not in here. It's like, let's run away and enjoy each other. Let's enjoy each other physically, and let's do that. There's no, so I think that's here in pretty vivid detail. I see 7:55.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, go ahead, Debbie.
I was just thinking of a book that's in the New York house that my husband has from years ago called The Code of Jewish Law or Code of Jewish Behavior. It's a real antique kind of a book with all the do's and don'ts that you're not supposed to do, and some chapters are sexual, I imagine. So I'm listening to this and reading this, and this must have been very pleasant to read when you have to obey the Code of Jewish law and all the books and all the laws that they have for intimacy and all of this.
Yeah, well, again, there was a lot of
fiction. This is like 50 Shades of Grey for some of them.
Well, I
not quite.
Not quite. I was exaggerating.
Yeah. But I mean, I will say, like, I've studied some texts, some Talmudic texts that make this look, puritanical, because it's in there, and the rabbis understood rightly, right, that, sex and intimacy were part of the human experience, and that Judaism has to address it in some way. And so I think that part is pretty interesting and pretty relevant, that they were that mindful of it. There is a fascinating story. I'm going to stop my screen share for a second because it doesn't make a lot of sense to start a whole new chapter. But there's a great Talmudic passage of a rabbi and his wife, and they are in bed together, conversing, is sort of what it says. And all of a sudden they hear a noise. And they don't know what's happening. They hear another noise, and it's under their bed. And so they get out of bed, and they look under the bed, and it's one of the rabbi's students who's under their bed. So they said to pull him out and go like, I'm making up the name now because I don't remember what it is. It's like, Shlomo, what the hell are you doing? You're under my bed during this very private conjugal time I'm having with my wife. And he goes, I'm sorry, Rabbi, I'm sorry about this, my teacher, I'm sorry. But this too is Torah, and I must learn it. Which is a fascinating story and a fascinating insight, I think, into the rabbinic mind in a way, that there is something Jewish and something, sacred about love and about sex. And I think that their recognition of that, again, to me, is very positive. that they understand it. The story, the Peeping Tom story aside, but it's more of, I think, that metaphor.
I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back about?
It's more that metaphor of saying that this is important, right? Like, and this is valuable, and we have to sort of know how we're treating each other in all contexts. You know, whether it's in the marketplace, you know, when you're you know, trying to make a sale or a deal, you know, whether it's in the courtroom, you know, in matters of justice, or whether it's in the bedroom, you know, in a matter of love. We have to know how we treat each other and how we relate to each other, and that there is Judaism is part of all of it. And I think that, to me, is what's beautiful about some of these things, understanding that Judaism is supposed to permeate every aspect of our lives, and from the mundane to the sacred, so to speak, because Judaism can imbue sacredness, holiness in all different aspects of our lives. So I think, to me, that's one of the messages of Song of Songs that I take away from it, is that there's holiness, you know, in love and in attraction and physicality, that's all sort of part of God's creation, and part of our nature. So I think that's a cool thing to reflect on today, a little bit positive, a little bit, you know, something different and interesting, before we all now check our phones and the news, what's going on.
It's definitely different. Yeah.
Try to stay sane, everybody, over the next 24 to 48 hours.
Right.
Try to stay sane anyway, because there's a lot going on, and try to stay safe. I hope everyone received the email today from the synagogue about sort of our measures right now. Yes. That's important, and we're going to be monitoring the situation closely, but we really want everyone to stay safe, and really be careful. That I think there's some false sense of security now that the vaccine is coming out. But I was talking to the cantor today, because I'm not sure, you know, actually whether it was she was saying how St. Pete, you know, that's where she lives down there. She was, I don't know if anyone else lives in that area, but she was saying by the stadium, right? Like they do traffic all the way back.
Oh, I bet.
Wow.
Because people were in line just to make an appointment. They weren't even getting the shots.
We couldn't even get an appointment.
We couldn't get one. We couldn't get online.
Most people
can't. Yesterday and today, it's 7 o'clock in the morning.
Right. Yeah.
It's
going to be a while. It's going to be a while.
It definitely
will be a while. So everyone, again, stay safe, stay healthy. And, you know, if you feel a little bit tense and crazy over the next couple of days, read Song of Songs a little bit. You'll feel better.
Right. Right. Good night, all.
Good night. Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye.
See you Friday.
Bye, all.